truth, justice, whatever. Yeah, that's kinda how I feel about this movie. It's whatever. The DCU had a strong start on the theatrical side of things with last year's Superman, and I really liked that movie. And Supergirl, played by Millie Alcock, had a good cameo towards the end. It got me interested in seeing how this reckless party animal would evolve into a more heroic figure. The movie is also based on a comic book, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, which is written by Tom King and illustrated by Bilquis Evely. And reading that comic before watching this movie was a good and a bad idea. It's a good idea because it's a really good comic, but it maybe wasn't the best idea because I couldn't help but compare this movie to that comic basically the entire time. In terms of being an adaptation, this movie leaves a lot to be desired, but we'll get into that in a bit. Supergirl is directed by Craig Gillespie and written by Anna Nagata, and it follows Kara Zor-El, also known as Supergirl, as she goes on a journey traveling planet to planet in an effort to obtain an antidote to save her dog Crypto after he gets poisoned by Krem of the Yellow Hills. She's also joined by a girl named Ruthie, who is seeking revenge on Krem for her own reasons. Let's start off by talking about the main character herself, Supergirl. She's not just some crowd surfing bar hopper. There's a lot of pain and grief that this character has gone through, so they're able to make you sympathize with the character. And Millie Alcock does a good job with the more emotional elements of the character, but she's also able to make her charismatic. In terms of the comedic moments, Millie does a good job, even if those moments aren't always written the best. So I think overall the characterization of Supergirl works in this movie. Does that necessarily mean she has the best character arc? No, I think her character journey actually leaves something to be desired. I don't think they do the best job at showing how she gets from point A to point B in terms of her character arc, but we'll get into that later. Another important character to this movie is Ruthie. I think the actress who plays her, Eve Ridley, does a good job with what she's given, and she performs the emotional scenes well enough. The character has this kind of formal presence to her, and it contrasts Supergirl and Lobo in a comedic way. You understand why this character wants to go after Krem, and you sympathize with her. She has a tragic backstory, but I do think that backstory could have been fleshed out a bit better. It just kinda lacks depth. This movie also could have woven in more meaningful conversations between Kara and Ruthie. Some of their emotional scenes could have just landed better and felt more earned. And one way this movie could have done that was by minimizing other aspects of it that aren't as important. At one point in this movie, Kara and Ruthie come across some side characters, and they're just not that interesting, and the plot points that they're involved in are just kinda predictable. And it's time they could have used to flesh out some of the more important characters. So let's talk about Lobo, who's played by Jason Momoa, and he's definitely one of the best parts of this movie. This is the DC character Jason Momoa was meant to play. His Aquaman was fine, but it didn't truly feel like Aquaman to me, but that's a different story. Lobo is this over-the-top bounty hunter, and whenever he's on his bike causing mayhem, the movie is just more entertaining. I think some of the better comedic moments also revolve around this character. But even though I enjoyed him in the movie, I don't necessarily think he's integrated into the overall story as well as he could have been. He's not vital to the character journeys that Kara or Ruthie go on. It kind of feels like they could have plopped in any character in his place. But with that being said, he's still one of the more entertaining parts of this movie, and hopefully we do see him pop up again throughout the DCU. So let's talk a bit about the comic that this movie is based on. One of the elements of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow that I enjoyed the most were the visuals. Kara and Ruthie go on a grand journey, traversing from planet to planet. In the process, we get to see some fantastic visuals and vibrant colors. Each planet they go to has its own feel and aesthetic to it. And that's not what you get in this movie. A lot of the visuals aren't that nice to look at. A lot of the colors feel washed out. And it's such a shame that we got something so generic when we should have got something special instead. We're at a point where we have so many comic book movies that you have to do a bit more to stand out. And this movie easily could have done that if it just followed the comics more, but it chose not to. I'm not one of these people that thinks you have to make everything like the comics all the time. But in this instance, you really just should have followed the comic more. I really don't know why you didn't. I don't want to make it sound like this is the worst looking movie ever. There are scenes that look fine. For example, the scene with Kara in the bar looks decent. I like the vibrant neon lights, and the set design is kinda interesting. But I also feel like I'm grasping at straws when recalling some of the scenes in the movie that look visually appealing. And because so much of this movie has this dusty look to it, it makes some of these other scenes that do have more color look better in contrast, even though they don't actually look that great. A big part of the emotional core of this movie has to do with Crypto, so I hope you enjoyed him in last year's Superman. I, for one, did, and I also enjoyed him in this movie. Now listen, I have a little scruffy terrier as well, so I was able to connect with this movie a bit more because of that. I was interested in seeing Kara go on this journey to save her dog, and you get to really understand why Krypto means so much to Kara. He's been the one constant in her life, so when his life is put in danger, it acts as a good motivation for Kara. With that being said, I do think they kind of hammer you over the head with Kara's connection to Krypto. There's maybe one too many flashbacks. It got to a point where I was kind of like, okay, I get it. So let's talk about the main villain of the movie, Krem of the Yellow Hills, played by Matthias Schoenaerts. Overall, he's not a terrible villain, but he's not that fun to watch, or even that menacing. They go out of their way to show you that this is a psychopath who's heartless, and yeah, it's easy to dislike this character, but I don't necessarily think that makes him a great villain. We've seen characters like this before in comic book movies. This isn't a villain I'm going to remember in a couple of years from now. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of his design. He looks more like a henchman rather than a main villain. I'm not really sure what they were going for here. This movie also features the return of David Cornsweet as Superman, and whenever he's on screen, the movie just becomes more enjoyable. He once again brings that Boy Scout energy, but he also brings some of the awkward Clark Kent energy. I also like the contrast between Clark and Kara. What they have in common is that they're the last remaining members of their race, but they come from completely different walks of life. Overall, the action in this movie is competent, but it's nothing great. One of the sequences I enjoyed the most was the one where Kara is flying through space, fighting the tech pirates. It's one of the sequences that's more unique from a visual perspective, and it just has a sense of wonder. Also, any instance where Lobo was on his bike wreaking havoc was also fun to watch. In terms of the final fight of the movie, it's fine, but it's ruined by a cringeworthy needle drop that I'm sure you've heard about by now. It's just hard to sit through. So overall, there isn't a holy shit moment in terms of the action. Okay, let's talk spoilers. So we see that Kara's life hasn't been very easy. Like she says, Krypton didn't die in a day, and we see flashbacks to Kara growing up on Argo, which is a part of Krypton that broke off after the core exploded. And on Krypton, we see her mother, Allura, die from kryptonite poisoning, and we eventually see her father, Zor-El, also get sick. And we get an emotional scene between Kara and Zor-El, where they talk about Kara escaping to a different planet. Kara doesn't want to because everything that she knows and loves is going to perish, but Zor-El encourages her to live on, and he tells her life isn't tiny. We always see the Superman origin where he leaves Krypton as a baby, but we don't usually see it explored like this. It's interesting to see how things play out when someone has already lived somewhere for years, and they now have to come to terms with the reality that their whole world is about to end, and they're one of the only parts of it that will live on. It's also on Argo where she meets Krypto for the first time, so it really shows you that Krypto has been the through line for Kara for the different phases of her life. The thing is, this movie is really about Kara and Krypto, but the comic is really about Kara and Ruthie. And that kind of proves to be a problem because some of the emotional moments that Kara and Ruthie are involved in don't hit as hard as they should. There's a part of the movie where Kara is dying because of a kryptonite sun, and Ruthie gives this speech about how kind Kara is, and it kind of just feels forced. They really haven't spent that much time together. That isn't to say none of the emotional moments work between these two characters, but their friendship really could have been developed a lot more. At the end of the movie when they're saying goodbye, I was able to buy into their friendship a little bit more, but they try to make it seem like this friendship has been the core of the movie, but it hasn't been. Also, Ruthie's family gets killed by Krem, and the sequence itself is actually decent, but the problem is that we don't get enough of Ruthie talking about her different family members. She doesn't once say the names of her brother or mother, so I think overall her backstory lacks dimension. There needed to be more depth there. If Kara and Ruthie went on a more substantial journey, maybe there would have been more opportunities for Ruthie to reflect on her family, but the journey they go on just isn't that grand. There's a point in this movie where Kara and Ruthie come across a couple who run a bar, and they offer to help Kara and Ruthie find the brigands, so they follow them back to their home. They then give Kara some tea, and it turns out that the tea is actually poisonous. So it turns out that the couple wants to exchange Kara and Ruthie for their daughter, who has been taken by the brigands to be made into a bride. But eventually their plan fails, and Krem ends up killing them and their daughter. But I feel like I should have felt more when this family died, but the movie didn't do a good enough job at making me care about the parents. It felt obvious they were leading Kara and Ruthie astray, and they just never had a lot of dimension to them. They didn't really feel like fleshed out characters, they felt like plot devices. So let's talk a bit about the humor in this movie, which is hit or miss. That little alien dude played by Seth Rogen on the bus is fine, but he's your run-of-the-mill comic book movie sidekick character. He's what you would expect. And that's really what a lot of the humor in this movie is. Stuff that you would expect. There's some joke where Ruthie gets some puffy suit and she's freaking out, and I really don't know what that was. Some of the humor here just feels uninspired, like when Kara reaches into her pocket and she pulls out the middle finger. Like, what are we doing? Come on. But I will say that the scene where Kara and Clark meet for the first time is pretty good. It's funny and endearing, and I like Kara's line about Clark wearing his underwear on the outside. I also like how bumbling and awkward Clark is in this scene. So towards the end of this movie, Ruthie gets the chance to kill Krem, but Kara convinces her not to, and her reasoning essentially boils down to revenge won't set you free. She's able to get through to Ruthie, and we get a sorrowful line from Ruthie where she says she wishes it never happened, it being the death of her family. Kara then stabs Krem to death. Sure, you could say that this moment provides some catharsis considering how awful Krem is, but after watching this movie, this scene didn't leave much of an impact on me. This climax is fairly straightforward and not as inspiring as you'd want a climax to be for a movie about Supergirl. It doesn't provide any satisfying conclusion to a previously set up character arc. She just decides to kill Krem, and that's basically it. I'm not going to go in depth into the comic ending, but it has more substance and nuance, and you should experience it for yourself. So let's talk a bit about Kara's arc in this movie. At the beginning of the movie, she doesn't want to stay on Earth because she doesn't view it as her home. She had a home that she stayed on for years, and she had to experience its demise. But throughout the movie, she's able to overcome some of her trauma by helping Ruthie overcome her desire to kill Krem, preventing the grief from consuming her. This is so by the end of the movie, she's ready to give Earth a shot. But I don't feel like they do the best job at showcasing how exactly this journey has made Kara have this internal change. One part of Kara's story that works better is the element of her finding her people. It's set up early on when Clark mentions that she's not going to find her people if she keeps leaving Earth, but she's able to connect with Ruthie, who's someone that's also experienced a lot of loss. But taking all of the events in the movie into account, the change she goes through where she now wants to stay on Earth feels a bit out of the blue. So overall, I think her character journey could have been better defined. In the final scene, Kara and Krypto go to Clark's apartment, and Kara and Clark talk while Krypto gets into the fridge. And the movie ends with Clark getting up to go stop Krypto because he's getting into the chocolate. It's a fine way to end the movie, but it's just kinda abrupt. Also, can Kryptonian dogs really not have chocolate? You learn something new every day. Overall, this movie is a decent time, but nothing great. I know I've compared it a lot to the comic, but it's kinda hard not to. This had a lot more potential than what it ended up being. There are still some positives. Millie Alcock is good as Supergirl, some of the emotional elements work, Lobo is a lot of fun, but overall this movie is just lacking. It's far more generic than what it should have been. And after watching this movie, I was just like, yeah, that was another comic book movie. It doesn't have a unique enough identity of its own. And I hope things pick back up with Lanterns, but it's unfortunate that the DCU already has a bit of a blunder. But those are my thoughts on the movie. Tell me what you think about Supergirl in the comment section, and make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.